the Israelis fully expected that Iran would collapse within the first 24 to 72 hours under the weight of their initial airstrikes. And
hammering, yeah.
Then Ben-Gvir, a few days later, admitted publicly what nobody in the Israeli government or anywhere in the Israeli media would admit, which is, gosh, we underestimated the Iranian arsenal. We didn't appreciate it. And that's why they came to us immediately, said, you've got to get into this war. You've got to bail us out. You've got to help us. And I think Donald Trump wrestled with that because obviously his donors want him to do that. And he's the prisoner of his donors to a large extent because they put him into the White House. You can't ignore them. But on the other hand, he really doesn't want a war. So he opted for what I think in retrospect will be seen as more of a PR stunt, a staged event, political theater, call it whatever you want. And these strikes, were announced before we went in. We told them we were coming in 2 hours. There was no, as far as I can tell, pushback from the integrated air defense systems. No missiles were fired. I don't know if they turned their radars on or not. I'm sure they have the radar cross-section target form for the B-2s and everything else anyway. They're not a secret and haven't been for a while. So I don't know, but I think that's basically what happened. And what's dangerous now is that he's imputing to this a steady state outcome. Right. The truth is, and he let it slip very briefly. If you listen to the remarks, well, it could happen again. In other words, this could break out again. Yeah, it could break out tomorrow. It could break out in 6 weeks. It could break out in 2 months. We don't know. And right now, we know that the Israelis are running out of cash and missiles. And I'm sure we're trying to send them everything we possibly can. By the way, we have fired hundreds of missiles from our destroyers in support of the Israelis and their air defense against incoming Iranian missiles. We're about out. Our ships have to go back to port to reload. I know that our THAAD battery on the ground has had to fire virtually everything it has. There was an article that came out, I think, within the last 24 hours in a trade magazine where a representative from Raytheon admitted that we've got a real problem with rocket motors, and it affects certain classes of missiles. I think it's the Standard Missile 2, Standard Missile 6, can't remember, also AMRAAM, a number of missiles out there. Well, that's because we don't manufacture the rocket motors. We manufacture components. We're dependent on external sources for the rest of it. And he was simply saying, I don't think we can do much quickly. And then we had this business of 600 missiles a year. We've managed to increase that to 660 a year that we can manufacture. Listen, that's not going to work. You know, we want to be a great power. We want to be a superpower. Trump likes to grandstand about that. Well, I better find out what happened to the manufacturing base. When are we gonna build a manufacturing base that can keep up? That's something the Russians and the Chinese don't have a problem with. We've got a serious problem with it. So all of these statements are ill-advised, these public statements from him, in my judgment.
Doug, I'm curious. How common or uncommon is it in the course of history of making announcements of the strikes that you're going to be making? And here it happened on both sides.
You're saying the Iranians did it. Well, I think they did it as a courtesy to us.
Right.
You have to remember, we are the ones that struck first. And we are the ones backing the Israelis. We are the ones that have opted for war with Iran. Iran's not interested in a war with us. And the Iranian leadership from day one has done everything in its power to avoid provoking us in any way. I think their attitude has been, let's not give the Americans an excuse to do even more than they're already doing for the Israelis. So let's back off as much as we possibly can. I still think that's their view. They will do everything they can to avoid attacking us, avoid any kind of collision with us. And so they picked out Qatar, which they knew was evacuated. That was one of the first places we evacuated. They picked the base. They told us we're going to go in there. They gave us a warning. We went in, destroyed everything, and then they left. Okay. In other words, it's tit for tat. I think you'll always see that from the Iranians. They're not interested in a war with us. And that's very good, because if President Trump were very, very clever, he would exploit that to avoid being drawn in even more into Israel's war, as I said, not just with Iran, but with the whole Muslim world.
Do you think they're humbled enough, Doug, that they won't be as aggressive, trying to re-enrich uranium in the as time goes forward?
I think they will have a nuclear weapon quite soon. And the reason I say that is that the lesson of all of this is that if you have a nuclear weapon, the United States and its friend Israel don't attack you. So the incentive now to build a nuclear weapon is greater than it's ever been.
Right.
And remember, we always had the option of embracing the idea of a nuclear-free zone in the whole Middle East that everybody would sign up for except Israel. Israel is special. Never forget that. Israel deserves everything. No one else deserves anything. Yeah. And the Israeli position is we have to have these. It all begins with the Holocaust narrative, runs all the way through the 50s, 60s. In fact, in 1952, the Israelis began the process of trying to build nuclear weapons immediately. They wanted them. They felt they had to have them. But remember, it also confers an ability on Israel to, frankly, bully their neighbors. I mean, if you know that your little neighbor next door can march in, do a lot of damage on a conventional level, that's one thing. But if you fight back and you, for instance, manage to win on the battlefield, then you have to reckon that the nuclear weapons will be used against you. So they're not willing to give up this monopoly. That's a monopoly in the region. And that's also the foundation for hegemony. And that's what they want. And that's not just they. We'll talk about that in the future, about what else all of this means in the region, because the banking interests in New York City and the City of London are very interested in the outcome, just as they've been very interested in trying to destroy Russia. Now it's Iran. That's related. But I think we have to understand these things are connected. And now I think the game is up. You will see nuclear weapons in the hands of other countries in the Middle East.
Well, that ties in very specifically, I think, to this next soundbite that I have for you, because here I think, talking about the world economy and the markets, here is Trump reaching out, putting out, I guess, maybe a carrot on a stick for Iran. You tell me what you think about this.
Yesterday, you said China can now continue to purchase oil from Iran.
Yeah.
Are you giving up on your maximum pressure campaign? Because there are sanctions right now.
With who?
On Iran.
No, look, they just had a war. The war was fought. They fought it bravely. I'm not giving up. They're in the oil business. I mean, I could stop it if I wanted. I could sell China the oil myself. I don't want to do that. They're going to need money to put that country back into shape. We want to see that happen. No, if they're going to sell oil, they're going to sell oil. We're not taking over the oil. We could have, I used to say with Iraq, keep the oil. I could say it here, too. We could have kept the oil. No, China is going to want to buy oil. They can buy it from us. They can buy it from other people. But you're going to have to put that country back into shape. It desperately needs money.
Is that a carrot, Doug, or is it more than a carrot? What is it?
I think it's another delusion. The idea of closing the straits is real, and the Iranian parliament voted to do it. I think for the moment, the Iranians have decided they don't need to do anything, because if this recommences, then the insurance companies that have to insure all the oil tankers won't insure them. And if you can't get insurance, what happens? Look at the transit to the Red Sea. It just stopped. No one was willing to insure the freighters, the large container ships. I think you'd have something similar happen in the Straits of Hormuz. So it's kind of moot. Now they can also mine it, and that's quite easy. It's very easy to mine the Straits of Hormuz. And if they're mined, then that's an enormous pain in the neck that will take a long, long time to rectify. But here's the China connection that needs to be kept in mind. The Chinese obviously are very interested in sustaining the flow of oil out of the Persian Gulf. On the other hand, the Chinese have also made it very clear that they stand behind Iran and that they will provide Iran assistance. And I'm sure the Iranians have talked directly to them, as they have with President Putin in Moscow, and said, look, we may have to do this. I also think that the Russians would then double down and triple their petroleum output to supply the Chinese with what they need to make up for the shortfall. In other words, I know that President Trump likes to think that he's the master of the universe and controls everything, and he pitches everything from that vantage point, but we don't. And that should be borne in mind. But I'm glad that he brought it up because it demonstrates the strategic implications for what we've been doing in the Middle East. And that's why the notion that this war is over is just ridiculous. It's not.
One more. Let me just put the cherry on the cake here. So then, the way everyone is in lockstep with what the narrative that they're trying to propose here. Here's J.D. Vance talking about what he sees, big picture wise, as to what all is going on.
The president's been extremely clear about America's national objective here. It is to create a world where Iran cannot build a nuclear weapon. We, of course, destroyed the nuclear program that they had, and the president told the entire team, we're going to work to make sure that they don't try to rebuild that nuclear capability in the future. For Israel, think about this. They've accomplished an important military objective. They've helped us destroy the Iranian nuclear program. They've also destroyed the conventional missile capability of Iran that threatened the country of Israel. For the Iranians, I think this is a new opportunity to actually pursue the path of peace. As I said yesterday, what the Iranians have showed through their support of terror networks, through their now failed effort to build a nuclear weapon, is that they're just not very good at war. And I actually think when we look back, we will say the 12-day war was an important reset moment for the entire region.
Doug, this reminds me of George Bush on the USS Abe Lincoln, with the big banner behind him, mission accomplished. Mm-hmm. We are victorious. Can you imagine him not regretting what he just said?
Well, if he's the vice president of the United States, he has an obligation to support the president. Never lose sight of that. Having said that, I'm not sure that he doesn't believe at least some of what he said. Mm-hmm. Now, let's look at it from the Iranian standpoint. Iran is not destroyed. Iran has not lost the war. Iran has thousands of missiles, including medium-range ballistic missiles, left with which to carry on the war. It has a manufacturing capability to build more missiles. So the notion that this is somehow a great loss for Iran and they have no choice now but to back down is foolish. What he's describing when he says they can now choose a different road to peace, if you're an Iranian, that is the road to submission and subjugation by Israel. That is, you submit unconditionally, as President Trump would say, to whatever the Israelis demand. And I don't see that happening. I just don't. So I think the whole narrative at that point collapses. So I wouldn't worry too much about what's being said right now. I'd worry instead about the potential in the future for this thing to get out of control. Because behind all of this is the lingering possibility that we threaten Iran directly to do infinitely more damage, even to use potentially nuclear weapons. I hope not, but that would very definitely bring us into direct confrontation with Russia and China, and probably a lot of other people. So does this cost him anything? I don't think so at this point.